Hugo Rourke, co-founder and CEO of Perx Health. Thank you so much for joining us on Build It, They'll Come. Great to have you.
Thanks, Helen. Great to be here.
Now, you began your startup journey, just under 7 years ago, but we'll talk about the journey in a moment. But what is Perx Health? I mean, it's not necessarily a brand or a name that we've all heard of.
No, so Perx Health is a targeted digital health solution. And we work with insurers and providers to provide an app to people managing health conditions, which is actually a large part of our healthcare system. It's about 90% of our healthcare spend.
What is?
Treating people with chronic health conditions like diabetes or heart disease. And
so long-term conditions that they may be in a treatment plan through a doctor or a hospital,
exactly.
Not you guys.
Exactly.
But your app, digital solution helps them manage it.
Yeah, what we do within that is all about management. And when we think about management, we think about two key things. One, making it really easy for people to manage all the things to do with their health. And in chronic disease, that's things like medications, it's physical therapy, it's appointments with doctors, it's reporting surveys to their care team, but then also making it motivating and making it really motivating to do those tasks every day, because the truth is, across all those different tasks, people actually only do about half of what their doctors or clinicians or allied health professionals are telling them. So we focus a lot on the behavior change aspect of this, alongside making it simple for those people to manage their health.
So how do you motivate them?
Yeah, so we think about three big buckets of motivation. And the core of Perx is taking the best of behavioral science and applying it to quite a medicalized area of health, which is disease management. But what we use are things like intrinsic motivators, so helping people feel that sense of achievement in managing their health through
through your app.
Through the app.
Engaging with the app on their smartphone.
Engage in the app, and they might hit a streak. So it might become very motivating if you're a person who's we have people who've crossed the 1,000-day streak mark of perfect days of managing their health, and that becomes really motivating for them. The second area we think about is extrinsic rewards to balance those. So things like gift cards to your favorite retailers, or shops that you enjoy, like a loyalty program, but also charity donations. So plenty of people out there are quite altruistic rather than with those extrinsic motivators as well. And we saw that in things like the bushfire appeal, for example. We saw a lot of people getting behind that and donating those rewards to the bushfire appeal a couple of years ago. And then the third area we think about is social. So we think about how do we get people collaborating or competing in managing their health. And you'll notice that those motivators are really common in other areas of our lives, whether it's in retail loyalty programs, whether it's in our social media platforms, whether it's in Duolingo for language learning. And yet no one has applied these before in the area of behavior change for disease management. So that's what Perx
No one
was set
has
up.
done that before.
No, not really. And we were stunned. So Scott and I come from backgrounds where we're exposed to a lot of these tactics.
Scott is
my co-founder,
Yeah.
Very good point. And both of us in our early careers got exposed to these tactics. In his case, it was more on trading platforms, which use a lot of these tactics to drive volume in trading. In my case, I worked with a lot of consumer companies at McKinsey. So we worked with games and gaming companies. I worked on loyalty strategy for supermarkets. I worked on promotion strategy for alcohol, sadly, but also consumer packaged goods. And those tactics work, and we could see that empirically. So we wanted to bring that into what I believe is actually one of the most important ways we could use those tactics, which is supporting people to get the best health outcomes from their existing doctors and from their existing treatment plans.
You call it a digital therapeutic. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, so I think there's two broad areas of health apps. One is kind of wellness apps, where they're a bit like vitamins you might get down at your local pharmacy. They might make claims, but there isn't good evidence for what they're doing. Digital therapeutics is a term in our industry which is used to describe apps that have hard scientific research behind them. And so in our case, we've run a few different trials with different bodies, but including a randomised control trial, we were able to show that not only we drove better management of diabetes in quite a complex cohort, but also that then translated to better outcomes and much improved their rate of diabetes control. So that's what digital therapeutic means. It means that we don't just have an app and make claims, but we've actually got the scientific evidence behind it that it's going to have an impact on those people's lives.
Well, we'll go into that in a little bit more detail later, but I love the name Perx, P-E-R-X, which I'm assuming is a play on P-E-R-K-S, which signifies that there are good things coming your way if you engage with this smartphone app. Was that the idea behind the name?
Yeah. So I think, like, in hindsight, we probably didn't think hard enough about the name, but we're very happy with the one we ended up with. I think, Scott and I aren't the most creative people. We didn't engage outside people. I mean, when we were starting the company, we just needed to get a name and get moving. But that being said, Perx represents two things. So the first is what you mentioned, Perx, which when you think about in your day-to-day life means a positive reward for doing something you should probably already be doing. So you might get a perk if you're best on field in your footy team, or you might get a perk if you're a kid who does their homework, or you might get a perk as an employee in the workplace at the end of the year. So it's just something that's a positive reinforcement of something you should be doing, but maybe this perk will help drive that behavior change. The other side of Perx is the RX. And that comes from, if you think of the top of a prescription pad, there's the RX at the top, which means it comes from a Latin word, and I won't geek out on that, except to say it means to take or to undertake. So to actually do the action. And our focus at Perx is not being a doctor or designing the best treatment plan. We're focused on helping people do the doing every day of their life. And so that RX really speaks to what our product is, which is helping you achieve the behavior change that you want to achieve, and with some positive benefits, some positive perks on top.
Okay, so you targeted from the beginning this idea of chronic, or not the idea, the chronic illnesses that affect people.
Yeah.
Why did you go for them? I mean, they must be the hardest, obviously, to get people to follow their management plans.
Yeah, so there's a few reasons. One, it's a place where we can have the most impact in people's lives. So, helping someone, and people have products like ours for wellness, whether it's for mindfulness or for exercise, and those solutions are great, but ultimately where we can have the most impact in terms of saving lives, in terms of saving healthcare dollars, is in the people who are managing these chronic conditions, who end up costing the vast majority of our healthcare spend and our tax dollars. And so that's where we focused. And we saw that in our own family with our grandparents and parents managing these types of chronic conditions, that we could support them in achieving that behavior change. The other reality is that chronic conditions are literally something you manage every day of your life. It's not, I'll go for a run this weekend, or I'll do some mindfulness twice a week.
If I miss out on my steps, that's okay today.
Yeah, it's okay today. But when it comes to chronic condition management, you need to be doing tasks daily, if not 3, 4, 5 times a day. And so we thought a companion app like Perx could really help people in that day-to-day implementation and supporting people to achieve those perfect days of health management.
And I guess the other point is that you've sort of tackled an area or a type of patient that might be really more high risk. They might be, what would you call it? They have some people would have the low ability to stick to a management plan if they have diabetes or chronic heart disease. Whereas the wellness apps, they target people who perhaps want to be well. They've decided already, I'm going to be fitter, or I'm going to be more well than I am. What other diseases fall into the category of patients that you help?
Yes, we work across a broad range. So we work across cardiovascular health, endocrinology and diabetes specifically, mental health we do some great work in, physical injury and recovery. Really, we've built a solution that focuses on the behavior change aspect, because if you crack that for one disease, you actually crack it for all conditions. And that's always been our thesis from the start. The other reality is that high risk individuals, to use your words, tend to be the people who are managing multiple conditions. And so all of a sudden, a single solution doesn't really, a solution that only addresses one disease doesn't really match their lived experience. So we've always built a product from day one that has been multi-condition, multi-therapy, because we wanted to be that one-stop shop as such for people managing all their chronic conditions. And we only learned that by talking to people who manage conditions. It became very obvious to us very early on that single disease siloed solutions weren't going to work for the people who needed the most help.
Right. So your Perx app could help if I needed to take, a pill for cholesterol, but also if I had diabetes and I was managing, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And there's all sorts of crossovers. That's a common one. Another area where we do quite a lot of work is in workers' compensation. And the two big conditions are, mental health related psychological trauma and physical trauma. But the truth is the people you have to worry most about are the people who have both of those at the same time and need to manage both the physical side and also the mental health side. So it's something we've always held dear from the start, and that we wanted to make something that matched the lived experience rather than building, for doctors or building for the provider, but actually focus obsessively from the start on that individual's experience and their lived experience of managing disease.
So just fill us in on some facts and figures in terms of how big a problem is non-adherence to a management plan or a treatment plan.
Yeah, so it's a huge one, and it's one we don't speak enough about. No one says that grandma passed away because she didn't stay on top of her medications. But in truth, that is a driver of outcomes like that. And so the problem, to give you the facts and figures, in developed economies, most countries spend 10% of their dollars on healthcare. About 90% of that is with these kind of people who are managing chronic health conditions.
90% of all our
healthcare
developed
spend.
countries' healthcare spend is with people with chronic conditions.
Yes.
Wow. And then of those?
Yeah. And then of those, you could say something like half that cost comes from people not managing their health correctly. And one way to think about this is that we already have great drugs, we already have great doctors, but where we fall down is that people actually only implement about half of those treatment plans. And so one way to massively improve the productivity of healthcare and the cost effectiveness of healthcare is to drive adherence. And so that's why we focus on that area, because we think it's the hidden way to massively uplift outcomes from our existing healthcare services.
Okay, so what is the difference, I guess, Hugo, between sort of Dr. Zoom, which we had during the pandemic and you couldn't see people face to face, but also Dr. Google, where we all go and look ourselves for, that's what I've got and that's what I need to do. And this sort of virtual health idea, which I guess is what you're really doing.
Yeah. So I think
what's the potential of virtual health?
Yeah. So one way is to describe this by analogy, if you let me kind of run with this. So we saw in COVID the arrival of telehealth, which had been in other developed markets for the best part of a decade. And what that allowed us to do is to use digital to interact in the same way as we probably were pretty used to with a doctor. But when it comes to areas like banking or e-commerce, we don't sit down and do a telehealth or a video conference with a banker or a video conference with a sales clerk. We actually have a very different experience for buying online or for interacting with your bank online. So what Perx is, we believe, is it's the beginning of the second wave of digital health, which won't just translate existing models of delivery into video, but will actually reimagine what is possible with digital and reimagine the way of supporting these people and delivering care. And we're really excited about digital because we think what digital has in spades is the ability to be with people every day of their lives, to engage them, to motivate them, and really be that companion as they go on their journey of managing chronic conditions.
And also, Hugo, you can get to so many more people. I mean, clinicians just couldn't see the same number of patients that an app on a smartphone could get to.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. And the scalability is critical. We work with tens of thousands of individuals. And to give you a taste of, comparisons, whole states of our country have chronic condition programs that might address 60,000 people across the whole state. And that's across hundreds of clinics and thousands of employees. And yet our app is able to support a similar amount of people in delivering care and supporting those people and implementing those treatment plans.
So you're going to take away jobs?
No, not at all.
All those people in clinics.
Not at all. I think what Perx does is it's really complementary to existing care. So doctors and nurses, what they are trained to do, what they do best is look at someone and come up with the right treatment plan and tell them how best to manage their condition. What they're not able to do is be with them every single day of their life as they manage their health. So unlike telehealth platforms or unlike other parts of AI for replacing doctors, that's not what Perx is. Perx is entirely complementary to the existing services we have because we solve a different problem.
Yeah, doctors are supplying the treatment plan or the management plan. You're not doing that.
We couldn't operate without the doctors, clinicians, nurses upstream helping people by prescribing those treatment plans and coming up with the best treatment plans. But what we focus on is a different area and it's a different problem to solve.
Yeah. You're not a medical doctor. You don't come from that world. You've said both of you and Scott, Scott Taylor is your co-founder, come from more the finance area. So it's still intriguing as to what drew you to this particularly difficult medical area, the problem of how to help chronically ill patients manage their disease on a day-to-day basis, manage it better. So I'm still intrigued as to why you're attracted to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we had a bit of naivety in terms of how hard this problem historically had been and how hard doctors and nurses and other people in the healthcare system had tried to address it, but failed. But what I think we were able to bring was a very different perspective that came from these kinds of consumer industries. Apps like Strava for fitness, Duolingo for language learning, Class Dojo for homework with kids are phenomenal in their area at driving behavior change, positive behavior change in those different areas. And so what we were able to bring into the medical industry is a completely different perspective to solve a problem that had been quite intractable.
Yeah.
The truth of the story of Perx is that Scott and I actually tried to walk away from Perx. We put it down for 6 months because we were like, we're not doctors, exactly the same question. We're not, we're young. What do we know about building a company? But after 6 months of saying, no, we can't do this, we realized that we had to try because if it helped thousands or tens of thousands of people to better manage their chronic conditions, and that was something worth risking 6 months on at the time, which was the original timeline we set for ourselves.
Okay, well, let's go back to the beginning. How did it all begin? I mean, where did the idea come from to do this? You were working in McKinsey's as a consultant.
Yeah.
But it's still very different to, helping Woolies lure more customers to the specials of the week than doing this to try and help chronically ill patients.
Yeah, I mean, it is and it isn't. It's behavior change. And that's our focus, is how do we help people change behaviors in ways that they want to and that their care team wants to. And so I'd seen behavior change work across all these different industries that face into consumers, that face into individuals. And the reality is healthcare is our largest consumer industry. It faces directly into patients, and ultimately a large part these days of the outcomes we see in healthcare is dependent on those patients self-managing these conditions. So that was the kernel of the idea.
What made you think of it? Who thought of it in the beginning? Where did it come from? Did you just dream it up in the shower?
Well, it was matching those experiences of seeing behavior change at work with the lived experience of people like my grandparents who are managing chronic health conditions and seeing them struggle to stay on top of their medications and having bad outcomes, or getting on top of those medications and those treatment plans and seeing much better results. And so it was the marriage of those two that came together in our minds, and was the kernel of Perx.
So how long did you research the idea? How long did it take you to settle on a kind of a business plan?
Yeah, so we worked on the business plan this is late 2015 now, early 2016. And Scott, to his credit, is a better business mind than I am. Perhaps that's to be expected from someone with his finance background.
And what did he do in finance?
Yeah, so he worked as an investment banker and then was in private equity. So was good at analyzing businesses and thinking about what made them successful. And while I probably had more of an eye for the product in the early days, he was always thinking about, that's great, Hugo, but how do we make this a sustainable business? Because if it's not profitable it's not going to survive. It's not going to last. It's not going to impact those tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives one day that we want to. So that's how we started back then. As I said, we then actually shelved the idea
Right.
for
So you
several
sort
months.
of had a business plan or a rough idea of how you're going to do it. You hadn't engaged any software engineers to help you build anything. You didn't have anything, any sort of product that you'd produced on your phone.
No, not at this stage. And
right.
we were both,
so you stepped back.
both still working.
Yeah.
We then put the idea on the shelf, convinced that we weren't the right people to do it because we weren't doctors, because we were too young. But then months later,
How old were you then, roughly?
This is, we were 26.
Oh,
so
wow.
pretty early in our careers.
Yeah.
But then we came back and I said, look, I am happy to leave McKinsey to spend a few months on this. And then a few months later, Scott followed me as well from his private equity job. And what we said at the beginning is we're going to get out there and we're going to speak to literally dozens of individuals managing chronic health conditions. We're going to talk to pharmacists. We're going to talk to doctors. We're just going to spend 3 months immersing ourselves in this problem. We then spent the next 3 months building the most terrible version of our app that I would be embarrassed to see today. And what, for literally less than $10,000, we got version 1 of the app up on the App Store and in the hands of patients who are managing diabetes, stroke, and a couple of other patient groups as well. And immediately we got really positive feedback about, I suddenly feel positive about managing my health. This is the first time I've actually done everything I need to manage my health.
So were you giving away the rewards, the gift vouchers and the presents as much as the bells and whistles on the actual app when they did something right?
Yeah. So the app was super basic at this point. It was literally, schedule your medication. And I think we could only support 2 or 3 at that time. And
we'll send you a reminder
We'll send you a reminder. You'll come into the app, take a photo that you're actually taking that medication, and then we'll give you the chance to win a reward.
Right.
And I think the only reward we had back then was movie tickets, and poor old Scott was sending those out via email. So it was all pretty basic in that first version.
Yeah.
But we learnt a lot with that first version. In 2017, we then started hiring the team to support us.
With what dough?
This is all coming out of Scott and my pockets, and
really?
Including
okay.
those movie tickets we're literally paying for with our personal credit cards. But we knew we were onto something at this point. So
because you'd had the good feedback from actual patients.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And at first it was...
And they weren't paying for it. They didn't have to pay for the app. It was all free for patients.
Pay for our
But you hadn't worked out how to commercialize it yet. You were still maxing out your credit cards.
we hadn't focused on commercializing is probably the way I'd put it, because we knew that until we could prove that people would be excited to use this product, that they would start to report that it helped them better manage those diseases. And ultimately, about 6 months after the beginning, we started to get people coming back and saying, hey, I've just got back from my doctor and I've got the best blood results I've had in 6 months. And those stories were really motivating for us. But we were still running on, basically our bank accounts going deeper and deeper into the red as we went through 2017.
But in a sense, Hugo, that's great that you actually were doing the R&D with the people who were going to make the product work or not work.
Yeah.
Rather than think, oh, how can we make money out of this at the beginning? Let's go and get some business person to back us, without doing the proper R&D to see if the product was going to work.
Yeah, that is 100% true. And we still, to this day, we know that our product will fall down if we don't put number one, that user experience of people using the platform.
So the patient comes first.
Yeah, the patient. Although lots of these people don't think about themselves as patient. I sometimes use that language as well. But ultimately, a lot of these people are just out there living their lives, managing health conditions, like, roughly half of Australia. And so we knew that we had to focus on those individuals and making a solution that was easy, exciting, a little bit rewarding for them as they manage their health.
Okay, so 2017, you started to build a team.
Yeah.
With what?
Yeah, again, our own savings.
Oh, okay.
And, by the end of 2017, we were pretty poor and broke, but we also went out and raised funds. And the reason we were able to raise funds is during 2017, we also signed our first 2 enterprise customers. And so we're able to go to those venture capital funds and those angels and say, look, we've got a product that is promising, There's a lot more to do on it. There's a lot of research to do, a lot of product development to do, but it's promising. Plus, we have the first customers interested and signed contracts to deliver Perx programs in 2018.
And what sort of customers were they? Can you just sort of explain who would be your customer, sort of different to the people managing their chronic illness?
Yeah, so we work with both insurers and providers. So our very first customer was actually a branch of New South Wales Health, which is super exciting. We don't think about public health as being the innovators in the space, but we were lucky to meet a chief executive of one of the groups of hospitals in New South Wales who took a risk on us. And what I think she saw, and I can't put words in her mouth, is two people who were passionate about the problem, but also had a radically different approach to what traditionally comes out of, the medical cohort and our existing healthcare system. So she took that risk.
Do you want to give a shout out to whoever she is?
I feel like I should. So her name is Teresa Anderson. And what she did was set us up to not only work commercially with her health district, but also then to run a randomised controlled trial alongside it. So we both got the commercial traction and we got the clinical evidence that over time would pay dividends as we develop the company.
So just briefly tell me about the randomised trial, because that sounds like proper evidence.
Yes, 100%.
It was a proper blind, double blind, that sort of thing?
Not double blind, because it's a bit hard to do with an app that people have to use.
Okay.
But it was a fully randomised controlled trial. There were about 50 people using Perx to manage their diabetes and other conditions, and about 50 people who didn't get to access Perx, although they do now have it after the trial. And what we saw between those two arms is, better attention and care in the Perx arm. We saw behavior change and better adherence to their medications in the Perx arm. And ultimately, we saw improvements in blood outcomes. So we were able to show at the end of 12 months that the Perx cohort had a significant improvement in their HbA1c, which is the key risk marker for diabetes, while the non-Perx arm, like most people in that cohort, had a slow deterioration in their HbA1c. So we're able to show that compared to normal care, that the introduction of Perx had a material impact.
So you did this in conjunction with the University of Sydney?
Yes, and Sydney Local Health District.
Yeah, right. And then, so what happened after that in terms of getting the product out there, and what did the product look like at this time?
Yeah, so, at this time we were starting to broaden the product. So we started focused and narrow in medication, but we knew that ultimately the jobs to be done for these individuals was much broader than medication. So in around 2018, we started expanding out into broader sets of tasks. So whether people are managing their physical therapy tasks, or they're managing appointments, or they're managing even steps where it has a more clinical relevance to, say, recovering after a heart attack. And so we started broadening out the app that way.
And you were, including all these sort of avenues into the one app.
Yeah.
So it was sort of the one-stop shop for these clients, I guess you'd call them.
And we're a big believer in that. And we think we've seen this in other areas of app development, that people like one app that does it all, whether it's in social, whether it's in shopping like Amazon, whether it's using banking or Spotify. And maybe I shouldn't call them out in a podcast. But we had the same fundamental belief that people want one place to go to manage their health. They don't want a separate app for their glucometer, a separate app for tracking their blood pressure, a separate app for managing their medication, and a separate app for diarising their appointments. They want that all in the one place. And so we're able to do that.
So between, say, the idea starting to germinate towards the end of 2015 and 2018, how difficult were those early years? And what really were the challenges?
Yeah, it's always highs and lows in a company like Perx. So 2017 was a pretty lean year, and I distinctly remember as we closed that fundraising round, I think it was the 23rd of December, 2017. And as we approached Christmas, I remember telling my then new girlfriend, who is now my wife, that Christmas was going to be pretty poor this year, and I wouldn't have the money to go out to restaurants and enjoy the summer period like others might be. Thankfully, that was the leanest Perx has ever been. And it's probably the time that Scott and I had the most personal, risk and stress. That doesn't mean that it's all been clean sailing since then
No.
at Perx, but what it means is, at least in the future, it wasn't just on us personally to keep this company going.
Did you think at that stage, that lean 2017 Christmas, I might walk away?
Yeah, it was definitely on the cards. We couldn't go much further. Like, quite frankly, we weren't going to make payroll in kind of January or February if we didn't close that fundraise.
How many employees did you have by then?
I think we were a team of about 5, except for Scott and I. So we were funding 5 employee salaries. Full
and
credit.
Responsible for 5 people's livelihoods.
Yeah, that stress.
Incredible responsibility.
That stress will always be there in a company like Perx. And we take that very seriously in how we hire and how we think about growing the business over time. But yeah, it was a lot of responsibility. And, back then we were 27. So it was pretty early days.
It's quite extraordinary. I mean, you went out and did the randomised trial, controlled trial. But around that time, or sort of getting towards 2020, we had those dreadful scandals and scams in the United States, the Theranos blood testing I'm thinking of, which, became a very famous podcast and then I think Netflix series. Even a company as big as Walgreens, and we know, massively rich investors bought that whole story, and it turned out to be, a fake, or it couldn't be proved that it worked and that sort of thing. Did you get stung by some of that kind of negativity in the market around that time?
Probably not distinctly at that point. That definitely had repercussions for hardware in the medical area. And we saw startups who literally had versions of Theranos that worked. And the sad thing for them was that they really struggled to raise. I'd say more broadly in venture capital until, 2020, health and digital health was not the most popular area. People were much more willing to fund other SaaS businesses or to go into marketplaces. Digital health may never be sexy, let's be honest. And what we do, supporting people managing chronic health conditions, is not what VCs want to go out and necessarily speak about. But what we've been able to do since then is bring some great venture capital partners on the journey who've seen us build this company over the years.
When did you know that this was a successful model, that this was going to work as a product and be successful and sustainable?
Yeah, so I think it was trying to get together the 3 key pieces for us. So first was the product experience and making that compelling for individuals. And as we've already discussed, that's exactly where we started and spent, been iterating on ever since. We'll never be done with that. The second piece was getting the commercial customers who could ultimately fund the product for individuals managing those chronic health conditions. And then the third piece was the evidence that it all really worked. Evidence takes time. So that clinical trial, we didn't finish until late 2019, and we published it with the British Medical Journal in late 2020. So these things take quite a long time. And I remember the moment distinctly of getting the results back and seeing that we had positive results on behavior, positive results on retention in clinical care, positive results on biomarkers. And that's when it really felt like, okay, this is clicking. We've got product, we have customers, and now we have the evidence that it's actually making a significant impact in people's lives.
When did venture capital really come on board and make a difference to the funding side of your life?
Yeah, so at that point, and just after we published that paper, we were lucky to raise money from Airtree, and in particular from Jax, who's one of their partners there, who's always had a long interest in digital health, and someone we've talked to since the early days of Perx.
This is Airtree Ventures.
This is Airtree Ventures, and I think what they saw in Perx was someone who, as we've discussed, was attacking a massive area and had the beginnings of success across those 3 different areas of commercial success, product success, and clinical evidence. That being said, a lot of our journey is ahead of us. We're still in the early days of Perx, and I keep my team honest of our product could be so much better. The scale of our impact can be so much better if we work with more customers, and we have to keep building the clinical evidence that shows that we're having that that impact in people's lives.
Does Perx have a protective moat around it? Do you have such a point of difference that no one can disrupt you?
It's a very good question, and it's one that we think about a lot. I think the first thing to say is the app experience, what you don't see is the algorithms that sit behind it. So what our app is trying to do is figure out, how do we present the best experience for this individual managing their health? And those algorithms are proprietary and sit inside our team. The other thing that really helps us over time is the deep relationships we develop with our customers. And we're on varying points in that journey with varying customers, but some of our customers we've worked with for 4 years. And at first they gave us, trial this with these 100 people. Okay, you've shown success at this. Trial across this state. Trial this, well, now roll this out nationally. And those kind of relationships you can only build over time. And they're a big part of how do we build a business that does exist over time is working deeply with those, dozens of enterprise customers.
You are a former consultant at McKinsey, you were telling us last time. That's obviously, a great career path you could have had. Why did you take the leap and go out on your own? You could have had a fabulous career at McKinsey's if you'd stayed.
It's a good question, and not one that other people didn't ask me at
I'm
that
sure
time
they
when
did.
I was leaving consulting. And I think there were two reasons. One was that we saw the opportunity to have real impact in the world and in a really scalable way through software. And at that point in our lives, mid-20s, we probably could take more risk than maybe if I was trying to do this now.
Like, what have you got to lose? We need to do it now if you're going to do it.
If I'm ever going to do this, we've got to do it now. And we also saw that if we didn't do it, that every year delay meant that people weren't getting this kind of support that we believe would ultimately have life-changing impacts for those individuals. So we had that moral obligation to have a crack. We didn't necessarily know that it was going to go amazingly over time or that we were going to succeed, but to spend some time having a crack seemed to make sense. The other one for me more personally is that I always wanted more of a sense of ownership. And I thought consulting was a wonderful way to start my career. And I wouldn't say anything against my employer, but ultimately for me, I wanted that sense of ownership over what we do rather than being the advisor, which is the model. And I couldn't think of anything that was greater ownership than going and founding my own business and seeing that through.
Well, starting from absolute scratch and seeing it through. What do you think you learned at McKinsey, and what have you brought of that? What have you brought with you to Perx?
Yeah, so I learned a lot. Like I went into consulting fresh out of university, and I did an engineering degree at university. So I wasn't exactly your perfect founder at that point. What I learned at McKinsey was definitely a lot related to consumer and what we do at Perx in terms of how to engage people and working across a variety of different studies as a consultant that was really informative in how we think about that. The other thing I learned a lot, and I was lucky to work with some great minds in McKinsey, which was on strategy and how to think about business strategy, not just in the day-to-day of making a product, but actually how to think about how do we trade off, where Perx operates, but US versus other markets, how to go about, building the vision and getting, I think it's helped us in areas like getting supporters in enterprise customers or venture capitalists interested harkens back to many of the things that I learned through consulting.
We'll get back to the venture capital and the people who've invested. Where did this entrepreneurial streak come from? Are your folks in business? Are they in the health industry? Where do you reckon that came from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually probably don't think of myself so much as an entrepreneur. For whatever reason, that title doesn't necessarily resonate with me. I probably think of myself as more of a builder. From
having done engineering, that's probably exactly the way you think.
From my early days, I was the kid who was, building little make-believe boats, or I was building things in the garden. I was the engineer at university, and now I'm building a business. And that's kind of how I think about it. My family, you wouldn't point to and say, oh, they're small business owners and therefore there was always that streak. But I think the thing they always gave me and my two brothers was always that sense of self-belief, that sense that you could, do anything if you put your mind to it and improve yourself. And then secondly to that, confidence that the world was a place where you could go and make your impact. And ultimately, that's what Perx is. It's a vehicle to go and make impact in the world and to help tens of thousands, hopefully one day hundreds of thousands of people to get better outcomes in managing their conditions.
Okay, so how many people are you helping? Give us some of your markers of success for Perx and where you are at right now.
Yeah, so we currently support around 40,000 people across a dozen customers. And we do that with a very small team of roughly 30. And so what that shows is the scalability of software to be able to support all those people in quite a serious area of healthcare.
Right. So when you say through customers, you mean, let's take New South Wales Health. Mm-hmm. They're obviously still supporting you in some way. Do you get access to all their patients who have chronic illnesses? How does that actually work, the partnerships?
Yeah. Well, one day I hope that we have access to support all those patients, but it is piece,
at the moment,
it is
not
piece
yet.
by piece.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, I think last week we started with Teresa Anderson at Sydney Local Health District, and we were working in diabetes specifically. We now work within that hospital group across 5 or 6 different conditions. We now work with a couple of other hospital districts around New South Wales Health. So in southwestern Sydney, we have some promising work, southeastern Sydney, and a few others as well. And
Fantastic.
So that shows our model as a business is a classic kind of land and expand your impact. So we start working at a pretty small scale, but over time, as we prove that we're a good vendor to work with, that we actually have impact in people's lives, then these customers that we work with have a huge amount of potential in terms of the number of people they support.
And the customers that you have, you may not want to go into too much detail, but, it's easy to find out. I mean, you mentioned New South Wales Health and some of the health districts in New South Wales, but also WorkSafe Victoria. I think you work with QBE on workers' comp. You work with HCF for health insurance. You also do health providers. So you do have a number of big clients, big customers, because your clients are really the patients, I guess. How do you term both of those?
Yeah, so we think about, our customers are the ones who pay the bills and ultimately make Perx sustainable. So they are those large insurers who you mentioned or large healthcare providers. And then we think of the individuals using our platform as participants in the program, but our product needs to solve for them, because if we don't solve for those participants, then our whole model falls down.
All right. So just back to those customers, how difficult was it to, pull them on board? I mean, they're big outfits. And here you are, you and Scott, you knock on the door and say, oh, look, we've got this great product that you really need for your patients or clients.
Yeah.
How'd you do it?
It's been a long journey. And this hasn't happened overnight. This is why, we've been at this for 7 years now, slowly building those relationships. And some of those relationships are now multi-year, and we've expanded our work, and some of those relationships are newer, but we ultimately could not achieve the impact we achieve without those customers. So they need to be in on the journey. They need to believe in us. They need to believe in the product and see that value. And it's not every insurer is going to take that risk especially early on in our business. But as we've been able to prove out the product, we've been able to get more of those types of customers involved. But ultimately, we end up working with the types of customers who want to see, innovation. They want to see improvement. They want to see a change in the way things are done, and they're not satisfied with.
And they probably want to see,
status quo.
In the end, lower costs for those perhaps very compromised patients.
Yeah.
Sorry, I shouldn't probably say compromised. They just have a lot of comorbidity and a lot of kind of interlocking problems.
Yeah, so those customers need to see a financial return, and that financial return can come in a variety of different ways. So it might be healthcare savings. So if we can give this to people who've just been in hospital for a heart attack and it prevents them coming back in within the next 3 months because they've had a second heart attack because they're better managing their
right.
cardiovascular
And can you prove
health.
that is happening?
Yeah, we work with all our customers on evaluating our services and showing that kind of impact. So it might be about savings. It might be about, better experiences for those individuals as a customer. It also might be operational. So when we work with providers, they often have they already have services in the analog world, which might have telephone banks of nurses calling people up, trying to encourage them to stick with their treatment plan. And so what we're able to do is come in and say, hey, those nurses only can call that person every fortnight or every month. With Perx, you can literally be supporting that person every single day of their life,
and
alongside those touch points with clinicians.
Yeah. And what sort of engagement are you finding you're getting from the participants, the users of your products?
Yeah. So our typical person uses Perx 4 times a day.
4 times a day. They'll come on to your app.
Yes. And
that's more than most addicts would use Twitter or, one of the social media outlets.
Exactly. And if on many metrics, on that metric, also on our monthly engagement rate, which is how often do people come in, and that's about 75% of days. So the typical Perx user will be in Perx over 20 days in that month. So
it's extraordinary.
It's extraordinary, but it's also necessary. If you think about our business, we want to be that companion every step of the way as people manage their health. And these chronic conditions are daily or multi times a day things to manage. And so we think of that as hygiene in terms of being there every day and having that impact in their lives, that we want them to be excited to come in every day. And plenty of people tell us that, once they enter that Perx program, Perx actually becomes their number one app on their phone because they're going there 4 or 5 times a day as they manage their health every step of the way.
Wow. So that's sort of the commercial partnership and the participant side. How much money have you raised so far through venture capital or angel investors?
Yeah, so we've been supported on our journey by a variety of different sources of capital. Very early on, we had early believers who were angels and actually an impact fund, Giant Leap Fund, who came on and said, we can see the potential of this business to not just be a good business as an investor, but also have impact.
So have they exited yet, or are they still?
No, they're still
in?
Very much part of the journey. As we've talked about, we then were joined by the venture capitalists like Airtree Ventures. But we've also been supported on the way through some grants from the federal government and the state government, which have also been really important in our development.
So our taxes at work.
Well, look, when we then work with New South Wales Health to bring down the cost of care, we think it's a fair return.
Yeah.
Across all those different sources, you're looking at something like 15 to 20 million in capital to get us to where we are today. And that's because we're building a very intensive product that people use multiple times a day. We're running clinical trials to prove the value of that. And then we're, partnering with some pretty sophisticated, pretty risk-averse customers and insurers and healthcare providers. And so we need to be absolutely A grade when it comes to things like security or privacy or even how we deliver our services. They have high expectations. So
yeah. Well, congratulations. That's a great achievement in 6.5 years really you've taken to sort of win those people's trust and get those venture capital funds to back what you're doing. How difficult was the scale up? I mean, it is only sort of under 7 years. You've had to hire people, improve the product, no doubt, trust software engineers. How difficult's that scale up been? Which is something that affects all startups, obviously.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't think startups get easier. As they say in cycling, which is another passion, it doesn't get easier, you just go faster. And I think that's kind of the world in startups. It doesn't get easier, you just do more. I think the thing that we're very lucky at Perx to have is the team that started with my co-founder, Scott, and all the skills he brought to Perx. But I love my position now at Perx because I get to look around and see far better product people than me doing product. I get to see much better people than me interacting with our customers. I get to look around and see people who are managing our internal operations who are really passionate or specialists in their area. And so that is the transition from a startup to a scale up, where as a startup, you're the generalist who has to do a bit of everything. But the really satisfying the satisfying bit is getting people in who can sit there and basically tell you how you've done it all wrong and how you can do it better. So it's been a really exciting journey to be on.
So can you say whether you're profitable now or are you on a path to profitability?
Yeah, so we hope that with our latest fundraise, which we did at the end of last year, that we have that pathway to profitability if we want it. And we may choose to go for further growth with that capital, but if we want to, we can hit profitability. When you think about the customers we work with, they literally have tens of thousands of people they could put on our platform and could be generating millions of dollars of revenue each if we unlock that scale. But to get there, we have to work with them for years and build that trust piece by piece. So our pathway to profitability is working with those customers, continuing to expand our programs, and ultimately have more impact on more people's lives.
Given that money's no longer free at the moment, as it had been for probably 10 years, and I presume ventures obviously tighter with giving out their money. Do they make more demands on you, or what will decide you whether to, no, we need to get profitable, or no, we need to still go full steam ahead with growth?
Yeah, so the big journey for Perx at the moment has been expanding into the US. And the US is the world's largest market for healthcare.
Holy grail, surely.
Well, it isn't. I mean, it's also more competitive, and it's a very confusing system coming from the other side of the world. It's very different to Australia. So we've had a team on the ground there for a few years now, and we work with a few customers across the US, both providers, multi-state providers, and some insurance plans. And so what we're hoping is that with the latest fundraise, we're able to show that US market is wide open, because there are literally thousands of potential customers over there, whereas in Australia, if you add up all our potential customers across all verticals of insurance and healthcare providers and public health hospitals, maybe there's 100. So it's a different order of magnitude. So that'll be a big factor for us over the next 2 years, is showing that we can take the model that we've proven in Australia that works for individuals managing health conditions, that has the evidence base, that has been a good commercial success, and replicate that in the US.
Yeah, and have you got participants, end users of your product in the United States?
Yeah, so at the moment, something like 2,000 people in the US will use Perx every day. And it's fantastic seeing them from all sorts of strange places, from Tennessee to Texas, I like to say.
Fantastic.
Because it's amazing that my team here, and we keep our product and engineering onshore in Australia, but the product they build is literally changing lives on the other side of the world while they're sleeping. So it's really great to see that.
Fantastic.
Happening.
With venture, do they help? Are they very interventionist? Are they interfering? How does it work, and are you happy with what they actually give you?
Yeah, so I think of our supporters as building a consortium. It's a consortium to build this product and this business to the world. And if that's our long-term ambition, is to have impact all around the world in many different places. At the moment, that's Australia and that's the US. And we're lucky to have around our table, each of our 3 rounds have been led by very different venture capitalists. The first one was led by an impact fund who cares about seeing those societal impacts, seeing the healthcare benefits of what Perx is doing. And I think that's set us up with a great core. We already had that as founders, but we had that reinforced from day one by that venture capital fund, Giant Leap. The second lot were tech investors. And there's a lot of what we do that is very tech and, software subscription services for enterprise. And our most recent investor has deep healthcare expertise. And so around the table, when we get together with our investors and as a board, we literally have voices talking about how do we make sure this is having real impact on people's lives? How do we scale this as a tech product? And how do we make sure it's working within healthcare? So we've been very fortunate to get that consortium of people together to support Scott and I, because we were relatively young and we are still young in building this business.
So can you pick up the phone and say, we're not sure what to do about this issue? or do they not get down to that nitty-gritty level?
If we want to, we can. And there's definitely domains where they have expertise each individually. And they're very responsive. I'll always say that. They're very responsive to your needs and they want to see you succeed. They're on that journey. They're investors. They want to see you succeed as founders.
Yeah. What's your secret sauce, do you think?
So our secret sauce is the behavioral science that drives the behavior change. As I will always come back to, the problem of people not managing their health conditions isn't a medical one, it's a behavioral one. And so from day one, we've always thought about how do we bring the best of science and the best consumer tactics to drive behavior change. It's our secret sauce. It's in our algorithms. It's our team's pedigree is all about driving that behavior change and supporting people to make the changes they want to see and get the best outcome possible.
A couple of questions that I'm asking all my guests and just quick answers if you would like. What are you obsessed about at the moment? Be it a film,
I think that's a layup for someone who just had a kid 6 weeks ago. It has to be my daughter. She's been fantastic over the last few weeks, and it's definitely it's a life journey that my wife and I are super excited to be on. So yeah, that's an easy one.
That's an obsession.
That's an obsession
for sure,
at the moment. Very easy.
For sure. It's a wonder you could spare the time for us today. What's one of the toughest things you've had to do in your startup journey?
Yeah, so we've already spoken about 2017 and when we were running out of cash, and that was pretty tough times to manage. The company's had other tough times. So we've had people on the team. I think it's always a journey when you let people go for the first time, and that's a really rough ride. But you learn that is a necessary part of running a team and running a business. And there are lots of other hard lessons that go on the way. I think, every startups and scale ups always put in the bright lights and people talk about the positives, but they don't necessarily talk about the negatives.
Yeah. Well, so what's the biggest lesson you reckon you've learned on this journey so far?
Yeah. So I think the biggest lesson for me is probably learning to manage yourself. I think, founders by their nature tend to be the kinds of people who, have a bit of a chip on their shoulder, something to prove in the world. They're probably a little bit more anxious than the average person, and have a lot of drive. And then you lay that up with the highs and lows where, the highs are higher and the lows are lower when you're building your business. So, managing yourself, managing your own mental health, be it on the downsides or on the positive sides, is really important because building a company, is a marathon. And it's literally the one thing I say to all founders is, it's not a sprint. People talk about the sprint and the hustle to make a company, but it's actually something that happens over years, decades, lifetimes. And so that is a marathon. And so you've got to learn to manage yourself, whether that's, in my case, I have a great co-founder who happens to be one of my best mates, and we can talk about these things openly, whether it's with family and friends, and from time to time with professional help. Those are the kind of things that are really, important to learning to manage yourself and going the distance.
What would you say to other young people who might have a great idea and think, I want to do what Hugo's done?
Yeah, I think you've got to really look inside and say, what are your motivations for doing this? Does your personality match what it takes to be a founder? And there are different types of founders. So have a look around, read their stories, and then what's the motivation that's going to keep you going day in, day out? Because it's not going to be financial. It's got to be the problem that you're
meaning solving. I want to make $1 million or $1 billion. That's not good enough.
There's easier ways to make money, I think, than founding a startup, and all the odds are against you. So, I don't think that's the right motivation. It's got to be an obsession with the problem. And in our case, that was, how do we use behavioral science to support people managing chronic health conditions? And we're still obsessed by that today. So I would caution everyone to reflect, but equally, if you decide that is you, then you've also got to go for it. And you can't sit around waiting. People always tell you you're wrong. They won't like your idea. That's just part of it. But at some point, you've got to commit and go for it.
Hugo Rourke, CEO of Perx Health, thank you so much for joining me on Build It, They'll Come.
Thanks for having me, Helen. It's been great to chat.